And this works as well, perfect. So, thanks a lot for having me. Well, my name is Bernd. I will tell you a little bit about myself very briefly. And then I think this was the idea to come here. I will talk a little bit about a specific project I'm currently working on. At least today, but you will see in a second, I consider myself a figurative painter, as old school as possible, straight away back to the Renaissance, forgetting everything which we learned about modernism and all these kind of things. So just a few days about myself. It's not so much important. The only thing is to say, okay, I lived in a city which had the same name as the city you are currently living in, Berlin, between 1979 and 92. And this is where I got my socialization, also my artistic socialization, especially in the very late 80s and in 1990, when we had things like the permanent art conference here in Berlin, and we had an enormous amount of performance art and this kind of thing. So this is where I practically grew up in. And this was not always positive. This was also negative in the sense that quite often what happened is that there was not necessarily encouragement to do art in this time, because there was an enormous amount of competition. It was practically like blowing up, and suddenly everybody was getting out and trying something and fighting for attention. Which led me to a certain extent leave the country in 92. So for nearly the last 30 years I have been living in Belgium, which suits me fine because I love surrealism, and if there's a place which is by definition surrealist, it's Belgium. So I always say that I have been grown up behind the Iron Wall, and then I left the country to the surrealist shores of Belgium. Since April last year, I'm back. For me, it's a different city, a completely different city. Also because I choose to live now exactly on the opposite side of the city than I've been living in the 80s. And so the whole culture, the whole climate is quite different. While I was in Belgium, I was practically exclusively working on paper, doing collages, all kinds of forms of collages, printmaking, artist books, and this kind of things. It only worked to a certain extent, because certainly in the early 2000s, and definitely in Belgium or also in the UK, gallerists, collectors, etc., were not interested at all in works on paper. It was fairly difficult to do artwork on paper, collages, which are around 50 by 60 centimeters, the largest, or even smaller. So if you wouldn't produce anything 3 by 3 meters, you weren't considered a serious artist. So nevertheless, I have been doing this and then stopped around 2016 also, because I simply wanted to do something different. I had done enough, I could do it while sleeping, so I wanted to do something different. For quite a while I didn't do anything at all, I was traveling a lot, and then I suddenly discovered painting, especially realist painting of the late 19th century, and I said, okay, that's something I'm really interested in. I would like to learn this. This is practically the quest I'm currently in. So, and then comes the thing we all know about. It's COVID, and we had lockdowns. And if you have been living through COVID in Berlin, you have no idea what a lockdown means. Because when I was here while Berlin was under lockdown, there was parties on the street, people were drinking Glühwein, were taking out of the restaurants. Brussels was closed. Completely. There was nothing. You could walk through a city which was completely empty of people, was fantastic, so there was no social commitment at all anymore. But for instance, it also meant that you could invite one person into your social bubble, which is not part of your family. At that moment, I discovered, or I worked practically exclusively with human bodies. In the beginning, in the very first lockdowns, especially via Zoom, because suddenly everything went on the internet. It was very interesting to see how this development worked. And then very quickly I also worked with a model in my studio in Brussels. And this was the one person which was my social contact. So I think that this had quite some influence, and I haven't really worked it through completely yet, but I think for me that was very important because I have been defining myself at that time through this kind of work. When I started to think about going to Berlin, I was especially interested in the so-called Neue Sachlichkeit and all the kind of figurative work which existed between the 1920s and the 1930s and even after the war throughout the world, but especially in Europe. It was strong in Berlin. A lot of things got destroyed during the war. It was very, very strong in Italy, magic realism, in Spain as well. And there were lot of figurative painters in England, and of course in the US, because this was the time of the Great Depression, and artists were paid to go through the country and promote art, and most of them were working realistically. And I found it very interesting because a lot of these names I had never heard before. And as you can see, I mean, I'm not young anymore, and I thought I know practically everything about art, and suddenly I learned about a big chunk of people which I had never learned before, and it was very interesting. So research for me means I paint something. I'll try. What does it mean to me? What does it? This is just two examples. So now I'm talking about a project. And I will jump just a little bit because I think that it becomes clearer. First of all, I was asked a little bit to say, okay, whom I'm influenced by. I mean, I think every painter has an enormous amount of influence. So you could start from the Renaissance and then you could talk about all these people in the 19th century. But I wanted to name especially two people because they live or have lived here in Berlin. They're working figurative, and their way of painting, not necessarily always what they paint, but their way of painting was very appealing to me. Somebody I had no idea before, also theoretically I should have met him in the 30s as well. This was Clemens Grosser, who is a little bit older than me, but unfortunately died already a couple of years ago. And the other one is slightly younger than me, but still living. This is Jonas Burgert, whom I admire enormously, especially because apparently he can break all the rules, and it still works in one or the other way in his paintings. And I would really like to go into the studio and see how he actually works. Not just the paintings, I want to see how he makes these kind of things. Because to me it's a kind of a mystery. I have a certain idea, but how he conceives these kind of things, it's interesting. So when I came to Berlin, and as I have said, I mean, and I meant it this way, for me this is now a completely different city than I was there before. So the question for me was, what is Berlin? What means Berlin to me? And as I have said before, I'm now living on the west side of the city. I'm living in Wilmersdorf, Halensee. And this is the area where practically all the artists live between the walls and before first. So there is an enormous amount of artistic energy there. And I personally have the feeling I can still feel this. So the question for me was, what is this space? Can I define this? And how can I start to paint this? And So that's the project practically over. That is nothing more defined than this. During this time, I did one painting because this is just, we are coming out of Corona or of the Corona restrictions, and suddenly we can go to theater performances, etc. And one of the performances, I'm very interested in modern dance. So one of the performances is Sascha Waltz and Guest Company. I think is one of the few really good companies, dance companies we have in Europe. And this was practically the very first time we went out for an evening and for a performance. And I saw Saratiana being one of the leading persons in this performance. And her performance just spoke to me. And I said, okay, well, I want to make a painting out of this. So I contacted her, said whether whether she would mind. She didn't, and I worked from a video of this performance, took a few screenshots, and this is practically what it came out. At that moment, it was nothing but a painting of a person, a portrait. But this triggered something. And I said, well, can't I push this further? Can I make a series out of it? Can I work more on this? And so I wasn't still really sure, and I'm still not sure in which direction it will lead. But what I found was a series of photographs by Ashkan Sahi in 2015, which is called The Berlin Woman, Die Berlinerin. And when I think what he just did is he was walking around and people he knew he was interested in, he made photographs and he published all this. And this was one of the influences for the project. I mean, of course, I don't say it's easy what he's doing, but of course for him it's much easier. He takes his camera, he goes around and he says, okay, you are interesting. Can I make a photograph of you? Eventually he brings the person into the studio or a place and they make 2 or 3 hours photo shooting.
As a painter, you have the problem, well, if you want to bring the person in, nobody sits anymore 50 to 90 times until you have done the portrait. So you have to work via photograph. So practically what you do as a painter is you do this work or you take this work and you do the next step. So these are the possibilities. So as I said, this was the very first one. That's the second one, and I think it's more or less also the last one I'm showing you. This is another artist here in Berlin, and what so practically this is how this project is evolving. I have a few ideas, a few people I would like to portray. So I think at the very end I want to have a couple, let's say 10, 20 paintings which define for me how I currently see the city, and especially in the artistic sense, and how does it speak to me. And I have only made this, I'm not very good in making photographs from the process. My problem is there is a childhood of a painting, which you see here on the left, which is the underpainting. The Renaissance painter would have taken a brown, would have taken amber or things like this. I'm using cobalt blue. Well, the reason is these guys in the Renaissance, they didn't have cobalt blue, and ultramarine was simply far too expensive. But it gives even a far more interesting effect of deepness, of form, of volume than, for instance, amber. Is, by the way, something which was developed by Maxwell Parrish in the US, I think in the 1920s. So that's the underpainting, and then I'm starting glazing over it. And so there are, I don't know, 20, 40, 50 glazings, layers over it, one over the other. They're all transparent. So after a while, the picture comes out. So on the right, you see the final portrait. This is, I mean, maybe also a little bit why this person, she is, well, I would describe it as a sculpture. So what she is doing, she is working with fashion. She is working with wearable clothing sculptures, so that you have a person inside the sculpture. There can be performance and things like this. Quite often it's done with latex. I think she is currently working at the UDK or studying here, and I saw this kind of artwork, and especially from the color point of view, is very colorful. It's deep blue, it's deep orange, and things like that. And say, well, that's interesting. Can I do something with this? But at the same time, I had this project in mind, and then I saw this picture and the photograph, and I asked her whether I could use this to make a portrait of her. So this is practically where I currently am. And with this, I thank you.
Do it. So, yeah, I would want to ask something because you mentioned about the lockdown. So, did the lockdown it affected you on your work? But did it affect you positively in your observations, in the way the way you work, the way you search to do, try to find new ideas? Maybe did it open your eyes, maybe, or the opposite, or what was the effect on your work?
Yeah, sometimes I have the feeling I'm of the very, very few people, but the lockdowns, especially COVID, the whole situation was extremely positive for me. Because I was at this kind of point where I was changing. I was working on getting skills, figurative drawing, all these kind of things, and suddenly no social pressure anymore. You don't have to go to a gallery opening anymore. You can't even be invited by friends anymore. I mean, you just sit in your bloody studio and you work. Day out, night, etc. And as I mentioned, the other thing, which was suddenly, there was an enormous kind of community thinking throughout the world, because we all started to work via Zoom. So we would meet to very strange times, because somebody was modeling in Australia. So the group would sit in Europe at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the morning and paint this person, or the other way around. We would sit very late in the night because it was in the US. But also, I mean, at least for me, and I was there still in Brussels, I had enormous difficulty to find figurative painters, figurative artists in Belgium. So I didn't have a community, and this has built a community. So in this point, from this point of view, it was very positive. Yeah. This having said, I'm very glad when I came in April to Berlin, because everything was opening up. Galleries were starting to open up, looking for people to work with, which I definitely have also benefited from.
You talked about the process of glazing, and that there were 25 transparent layers to that painting or that work. And I don't understand what glazing is and how a painting can have 25 transparent layers. Could you just explain that a bit?
Well, I mean, in principle, it's very simple. You apply your paint very, very thinly, so that you can look through. Yeah, and so when you put the next layer on it.
But do you paint all of it in a thin layer and then again all of it in a thin layer? Is it parts that are
well,
exposed?
in the very beginning, you paint the full layer. So what practically happened, so that's the underpainting. So you have established your values. The next painting, the next layer would be a red, and the next layer would be a yellow. And I'm just putting this over. So this starts to establish the kind of a skin tone. And then you can go in and make the highlights where you put more white in it, which is definitely then more opaque. But the idea is always that the layers below are shining through.
So what my question really is when you apply red and yellow, are you applying it on all of it or just a certain part?
Well, the first layers all on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the blue is everywhere. That's the underpainting. The next layer was red. It's everywhere. The next layer was yellow. It's everywhere. And then I'm starting to modulate, looking. Okay, her cheeks need more red, so let's make another red layer on it. Overall, it needs to be more yellow. Let's put a yellow on it.
Interesting. Thank you.
I think, yeah, I've done portraits too, especially self-portraits. So I'm wondering if you are done self-portraits. And when I look at your portraits, I am confused. Is that you trying to show their professional, like as a dancer or as a basic human being? Like to me, it's like between. It's a little bit. It's not mysterious, but it's like ambiguous. And what your intention through the portrait, you want to show their. Because I don't see their personalities. It's kind of like between their professional dancers or like normal people. To me, look like normal people. I don't see they are like really. So what is your opinion about that, and how do you relate yourself to those people?
Yeah, that's a hard one. That's a hard one in the sense. I mean, when I'm looking in the mirror in the morning, mostly I'm looking the other way then afterwards. But I mean, what do I see? Do I see a painter? Do I see, yeah? And if she looks in the mirror in the morning, what does she see? Does she see, or the other one, does she see a professional dancer in it? So in this sense, I think this ambiguity is, if you see it this way, I think there are two answers to it. I'm still not good enough, and I need to do more. And the other one is, yes, I achieved what I wanted. Because as I said, I mean, it has also to do with what I have been showing you on the photographs. Practically, it's ordinary people, but when you dig later on, of course, these people always have a profession, they have a background, etc. So it's this kind of in between for me, yeah. So I mean, I don't want to paint a professional dancer. I'm painting someone who I saw in a certain context and got very interested in. Yeah, I mean, the other thing for me is I'm thinking very visually. What you practically force me is to conceptualize this, and this is where I have the difficulty with, because this is what I don't want. I don't want to conceptualize this. I want to show it. Yeah? And if this works, it's fine. If it doesn't work, it's my fault.
Do you have any strategy how to avoid cliches? Do you think about it when you start doing the portraits? Like,
No.
This is something I don't want to do.
No, I mean, I'm far too old. I mean, I'm full of all kinds of, as you call it, cliches, or how do you call this? Prejudice.
Stereotypes.
Yeah, stereotypes. I mean, I call this socialization. Yeah?
So you are trying to.
I'm guilty of it, and I can't avoid it. Yeah, and I would say this like this. I mean, yeah.
So you pretty much embrace the cliches and stereotypes.
Yeah.
If it suits you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because again, I mean, when you work with people, when you work figurative, you have to ask all these kind of questions which are currently under discussion, and then is the thing: do I want this? And to a certain extent, I don't want. I'm also interested in a kind of a counter proposal saying, well, look, that's a human being. It's a person, but I would like to make it very personal. Yeah? I mean, it's not a painting of somebody who lives in Berlin. It's not a painting of a woman. It's not a painting of a human being. It is Sarah. Yeah.
Yep, clear. Thank you. Any more questions?
I wanted to ask, like, did you face any problems that was interesting to solve? Because you mentioned the blue underpainting as a key thing, and usually, yeah, so with some processes, it's not always smooth sailing. There's always like an interesting problem to solve in your art pipeline, or was it like a normal A to B?
Yeah, I think I didn't explain this because I shortcutted it. There is a reason why I'm not making photographs of the stages. For me, a painting, or did I explain it? For me, a painting runs through childhood. This is childhood. So this is practically, and then comes adolescence, and the painting just looks ugly. Yeah, it has 15 knees, 3 elbows, nothing really works, like somebody growing up. Yeah? And then eventually it becomes an adult I like, or I have been scrapping down. So, well, problems, not specifically problems, but every painting is a problem, yeah? Is a struggle.
So my second question. So this series, is it endless series? Does it have a goal that at some point you're gonna end it? And maybe a second small question is, do you think that Berlin changed, or Germany changed, or how people are dressed, or what the ordinary people are changed? Or is it the same thing? Because if you're doing like the same, through the decades, you're doing the same kind of series, would you reach a point that we say, okay, that's enough with this series because it's always ordinary people?
Well, let's start with the series. I mean, I don't plan to make 10 paintings and then stop. But normally my interest runs out. And I have been doing this with the collages as well. So I have been doing a series, and after number 12 or number 13, I was simply tired of it, and I said, okay, stop now. Let's do something different. So this has definitely an end when it becomes not really of an interest anymore. I mean, on the other hand, it's a series which will take time. Yeah. I have a few people I'm interested to paint, whom I have approached, but in principle it's a difficult thing. I mean, I'm by far not as extrovert that next time I'm sitting to somebody in the subway and say, well, can I paint you? Yeah. So my process is far slower than this. For instance, the next one, we did a summer show recently. It's practically ended today, and at the opening there was somebody playing a violin, and so this will be my next portrait, simply because also this person has a visual personality. Yeah, I think maybe this is what I should mention. I think people I'm interested in to portray have a visual personality. And this is hard to explain why this is, but practically this is the case. Well, has Berlin changed? Yes, of course it has changed. I mean, it definitely has changed from the time where I was here. I have the feeling, but this might be me because I'm not at the right places anymore, it is far more gentrified than it was in the 80s. It's much more, it's nicer, if this is the right word. Yeah, so it's not that rough anymore, most probably even in the roughest areas. In this respect, this has changed. It's far more multicultural. And what I see and what I'm interested to explore is, of course, all this question of identity and gender relations, which is a layer which, interesting, was all here in the 1920s. Yeah, and if I would make a comparison, I think I don't see much of a difference between 1920 and now. Yeah, so these two periods are very, very close together, but in between was all kind of nonsense. Yeah, so this is where we are currently are. But again, I mean, this is of course out of my perspective, my very subjective perspective, my background, my age, this kind of things.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I would like to ask.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Just curious to know, what did you mean when you said that Belgium is surrealism?
Well, things don't make too much sense. Yeah, yeah, and there is this kind of, yeah, I mean, how to explain surrealism in the sense? I mean, I could easily answer, if you see Magritte's paintings. And for instance, one of the most famous painting of Magritte is where you have a cityscape which is dark, which seems to be night, and then you have a very, very bright skyline. Yeah. Well, the guy didn't invent it; he has just painted his backyard. We have seen this every May and every October. The other thing is, well, when I was driving through Brussels, I always had the feeling if I go a straight line, I never reach the place I wanted to do. I always had to ride in circles, because for me, Brussels were different circles which were turning all the time. It never worked. So you constantly, it's a very small city, but I constantly got lost. So this kind of thinking, or is the other thing is there's quite a lot of Kafka also in it. Yeah. As well, if you think bureaucracy in Germany is strong, well, it is, because unfortunately you have people who believe in these kind of things. In Belgium, you have at least 3 times more rules like this, but nobody cares. And it works somehow. And of course it's fantastic if you can just ignore these rules, but if you want something, then you might have a situation where it's simply not coming. Yeah? And then you forget it, and then it comes. So this is what I mean. Yeah?